Okay, so here we are in a town by the water in Massachusetts. I'm Peter Coletti, and this is a new project. And we're going to explain some things that are wrong that we're working at correcting. This has been done, I think, about 4 or 5 years ago, this project. And there are some things wrong, and we're going to take a look, identify them, and then try to identify the corrections, if that even works. Right away, we have tree cryptomeria, these plants on the right. And it's not a terribly hardy plant. It's not terribly tender either, but it can be marginal in the interior of the state, a little bit colder. But here along the coast is typically okay. But they threw a red cedar right in front of the telephone pole. We have no idea why that happened. But we'll take the red cedar out, and the correction is, the simple correction, remove the red cedar and take this cryptomeria and Japanese cypress and put this in front of the pole. Spread them out a little bit more. These cryptomeria will easily get 3 or 4 times wider, and that'll fill it in well enough. So the red cedar comes out when you use it someplace else in the property. That's how that works. Magnolia. All the mulch around it, the little volcano thing, that's a new term these days for plants that are all mounded up. That's not a terribly high volcano, but that's very high around the base. And it indicates to me also, from not seeing any flare at all, that the plant is buried too deep. So we're going to be digging around these plants in this whole property to see how deep they are and see if that's not an issue. Let's take a look over at the birch trees in the middle. And not really clear there at all where the ground level is. So we'll dig around those and expose just how deeply they're planted. Typically the plants get balled up and the earth gets pushed around them at the nursery when they're harvested. And they're typically 6 inches too deep, sometimes more, sometimes less. And landscapers just can't figure it out, it doesn't seem, so the plants many times are planted too deeply. And we're going to see worse situations of that out back. But we have to learn if they're too deep or not. Now this is a white birch, Betulus papyrifera, and I was just saying to someone that if you want to see a white birch that's a mature tree in great condition, in full sun, then go to New Hampshire. You're not going to see them down here. They don't live long down here, and they like it colder. So here you have cryptomeria, I just showed you, likes it a little warmer. Here you have a white birch, which likes it colder. And I understand why they use it, because it's of the white. But is that going to be a long-term good plant? Besides, white birch gets bronze birch borer. And the client here had no notion that it gets bronze birch borer, which you have to take care of, particularly when they get a little bit older, because it will take them out and kill them. They're just not a very long live tree around here for a couple of reasons. They get leaf miner and a couple of other things. It's interesting that I've seen this plant a little more in the interior, off the coast, a little bit colder than it is right here by a couple of degrees. Does well if planted in a deciduous planting, in a shade kind of, if you will, with tall plants around it. If it has more shade, it tends to resist bronze birch borer more, I've found, and it puts up with the temperature better. So there's a little side note: if you insist on the white birch, don't throw it in full sun. So this is going to be dug around and made deeper. Here you have a lighting situation that you have one light thrown in the middle, and the right way to light any plant is from 2-3 sides. It's how to come up with some rule that's unalterable, because it doesn't happen in landscape. There's reasons why we do things a little bit differently. But a single light in the front, that's ghost lighting. It's Halloween lighting, and you see it nowadays in the front of people's houses, up the facade, real close to the building, just a wash of light. That's like if it were Halloween, but somehow that's acceptable lighting today. I don't think it is. I think it's, other than a Christmas light where you put a light aiming at the front door in a festive situation like that, I can understand that. But as far as watching the front with light up against the house, I don't know how grandiose you think your property is, but it must be, I suppose. So we're going to go out back and we're going to look at some other issues. These are red cedars. Junipers virginiana, good for the coastline, good for full sun. That's a nice little hedgerow. They give them a screen from the property. That makes a lot of sense. That should do well. And they plant a little bit higher, which is good. They don't like water sitting around the roots. I'm not sure if this is a wet site or not. That I'll have to find out. But they have to be maintained and brought back and not let sprawl. And that maintenance, it absolutely has to happen in this plant. And not just the once a year hair pruning thing. The right way to do this is to find I know you can't see it in the film, but find a branch heading up and cut just under it. Now there's one heading up and you cut under it. That's about as good as you're going to do on that. Here's another better example. And then you can't see the cut because this branch on top is masking it. These are getting dull, need to be sharpened. So these need a constant maintenance, not a once a year thing, but whenever it comes out of a parameter in something, when they're young like that, you just lop them off and keep the plant within a space without shearing it, okay? So that has to happen to these all the time. Hinoki cypress, that plant wants to be 10 foot by 15 foot high. Easily can get that size, and there it is against the corner of the house. Okay, here we have, coming down the right side of this property, to the west side of the property, 3 PG hydrangeas to paniculata, and the fence is looking awfully strong behind it. So we talked about maybe putting a vine on the fence. I don't know that you have to, not that the fence is the end of the earth as far as bad design. And these can get large enough maybe to screen it enough. It's also important in design to recognize what's relevant to the client, not what's relevant to me. And these folks aren't here all winter long. So if in the winter it doesn't look so good, it doesn't make a difference. No one's here. It's not planted for the winter. The fir tree could be Fat Albert, I don't know. Absolutely shouldn't be there and doesn't go with anything else. It's kind of a specimen plant, and that's not where a specimen belongs. Not a focal point area, really. And so that will get moved someplace else. The emerald abovite over here is a plant that the industry's been using for a while now. Tends to open up. It's multi-stem, so in the winter they tend to get beat up pretty badly, and they need full sun, and those aren't bad. So I don't know why they just didn't use the juniper they used up here. So we've got different kinds of hedgerows. Whoever designed this, you've got as we just walked by a minute ago, the juniper hedgerow, and in front of that 3 cryptomeria by the street that I've talked about. And then we keep going down the line, and we have a row of PGs, and now we have a row of abovite. I don't know. If you do this enough times, you get pretty much like a circus. So you've got to be a little careful with that. I understand changing some textures around and so forth. Not the worst in the world, just drawing your attention. And the bigger those emeralds get, it's a good thing they're in full sun, because I see them in shade sometimes. They definitely open up. They tend to stay tighter in full sun, of course, than they would in shade. American holly, nice plant in here in full sun. Have no idea why the designer used that there. They balanced it, you'll see later, on the other side of the property with an American Ilex opaca, and with nothing behind it. We're not quite sure about how that works. The problem's going to develop a little further down. But then again, we have this Osher dogwoods, the little dogwoods in the back, the 3 roses across. You have some lavender in the front. Lavender likes incredibly good drainage, likes incredibly poor soil, in my opinion. Doesn't need great soil, doesn't need water. This is well irrigated. Lavender is probably not the plant I would have used in that location. And I think we're going to find this is wet, because all these plants over here, which is a Leland cypress, you're going to be seeing, all are in terrible condition. Many have blown down because of the terrible winter we had. And Cupressocypris lelandii is the botanical name to it. And it's a fall cypress combined with a cypress, which is Cupressus, to give you that hybrid. And it's considered pretty much a weed in England. I hear, haven't been to England. And it grows very quickly. I would have put this plant in very small if I were going to plant it, 4 or 5 feet at the most. And I would have been careful about spacing and letting the plant get too broad too quickly. And these plants also, the Leland cypress is a shallow rooted tree. Doesn't have a real strong, great root system. No no real heart system, no taproot or anything. And there's not on these things, just several are tipped over. We've got to stand up and guide them into position again. I'm wondering if they weren't planted way too deeply, part of the problem. I talked about this when we were in the front of this property, about looking at the ground level here and seeing how deep these were planted, and I bet they're too deep. So we'll be digging around these, learning how deep they're planted, if that's part of the problem to why these trees did what they did. It was a very, very bad winter, I'll say that, as far as a couple of really windy storms that even the best plants, the best design could have had a problem. So understanding that still, the Leland cypress is a plant I have limited knowledge in using because I don't think it's a great plant for New England, particularly long lives. I don't think it is a long live tree in New England. So, pardon me, at least in my area in Massachusetts. So, not my favorite plant because it's shallow rooted, because it's too quick growing actually. It's hardy enough, I suppose, but not my favorite. I think it's weak wooded too. I think it breaks up. And always multi-stemmed is a problem in New England. Multi-stemmed tends to come apart. I've talked about it with the arborvitae we just walked away from, and regular Occidentalis arborvitae tends to be multi-stemmed, tend to come apart a lot more. These plants, the ones that are single-stemmed, I think are a better plant when they're a single-stem than multi. Multi definitely comes apart more. There's one in the back there that's all opened up, and if we don't do something, they're going to become worse and worse. So our attempt is going to make this planting a more successful planting. Hopefully we don't have to take all the plants out of the ground and replant them. But that's the client's decision. It's just my job to let the client know what's going on and the best corrections for the problem. The hydrangea, there's barely enough room for the hydrangea in that planting. And truth is, you didn't need all these arborvitae. I mean, all these Leland cypress in this planting. It just isn't so necessary. Would have thinned that out a good deal. So it's quite a massive planting of Leland cypress. And the browning, you see some browning, that's kind of typical. Doesn't mean it's a hardiness issue to me really, but there is that. You'll find that on Leland. And you look at the base. Take a look down at the base of this plant. Can you see a root fur? I'm going to use this pole to point to it. Do you see any kind of a flare at the base of this? No, you don't. Not even close. Probably 8 inches too deep these plants are. But I'm guessing I don't know that yet. But it would be common if that were the condition. I'll say that. And also, look at this. I'm just seeing an irrigation, drip irrigation hose that's in here. So these are what you are irrigated by a porous pipe type of irrigation. Who knows how much of this is on there? Who knows what system they're using to water, because it could be way too much water for these plants. Again, they like to have a drier situation. They don't like wet feet. This area looks pretty, I know it's elevated a bit, but I'm wondering if it's really that dry, but I don't know. You only find out when you start digging. But that's pretty interesting. Again, we've moved around the property away from the Leland cypress, the Meserve hollies. This kind of planting is kind of typical of what architects tend to do these days. 3 of this, 5 of this. Not a great imagination. Nothing great about this whole planting, I don't think. Here you have a bunch of rhododendrons. If I walk over here, I'll see rhododendrons. These are scintillation, I think, rhododendron, against the fence. Now it's already clear that owners of this property want to screen the vista or want more privacy. These aren't going to give it to them. Not going to happen. And so I would have put the Lelands over here, or a plant that I am guilty of using a little too much, the Thuja plicata, the giant arborvitae. If it's single-stemmed, puts up with shade, quick growing, far superior plant in my opinion than the Leland. So that was the wrong choice, square one, in my opinion. And the Leland, the plicata would have been a better plant, the giant arborvitae. And you could have put in little 3-4 foot plants. 2-3 years, they're going to be 8 foot tall, 7 foot tall, 6 foot. They're going to be quick enough growing, in other words, or they're not going to disappoint you. So that plant's going to be coming out, I think, and we're going to be putting a planting in with more screening ability there. The big U, I have no problem with that big U. The client asked if they should take it out. And I said, no, it's working its can off. I mean, it's screening the property beyond. It's softening the corner of the house they're rebuilding over yonder. So no, I wouldn't begin to take that plant out. That's a huge success, and it was already here. So I am a little concerned, and I did say there's a hole in the ground that you maybe can see beyond the U, and that's where all the drainage in the next door neighbor's property is going to be put into that hole in the ground. They're going to put a pit there. And I don't think that's a problem, that distance from the U, but U's don't like it wet. And if we're not lucky, then we'll get a real wetter situation going on here, and the U may not be so happy. So just noticing it, but I don't think it's going to be any kind of an issue. And more of the emerald arborvitae. And you can see a little bit of these plants coming apart, but that's not bad, I have to say. That's not anything excruciating. But they're going to have to watch it. And once they start coming apart, people are always asking me, well, what is the solution? Well, obviously you can't take apart the stems, so you have to tie them together and find some methodology to mechanically keep them together. That's all that you can do about that. And if these aren't pruned and corrected, the little bit of pulling apart you see now, then you tend to see this will become quite a bit worse. So there you have an American holly, nice plant, good-looking trees. Again, that's planted too deeply. And this is such an important thing we're talking about in this whole property, is a planting that they didn't understand depth. And you can't see a root flare at the bottom of that plant either. I don't hesitate to think that's too deep. So if we go around towards the house, nice rose border, the gentleman takes care of himself. Bradford pear. I don't know how I would have used a specimen like that in that location. They need the shade from the south sun on the terrace. But Bradford pear is a plant that I'm reluctant to use because that plant comes apart. And it's not that just a branch breaks off, that it comes into the main bowl, into the main stem. It tears it from there. So I'll walk a little closer and show you what I mean by that. In a Bradford pear, if this branch breaks off, some plants it just breaks, it gets weak-wooded. A silver maple, for instance, they just break, it gets weak-wooded. But a Bradford pear will tear this whole section of wood with it and tear out from that location. Now these are laterally branched pretty well, which is a good thing. Take this branch out that's heading upright. But when you have them more upright, such as the branch I think you can see my touching now, weak crotches, that's when it tends to pull everything with it and come apart. So when you have a more lateral branching, that's good. When you have a more upright branching, it isn't as good. Bradford pears come apart in New England. Nothing complicated about it. Tough plant, doesn't pick up and die, but does it remain ornamental long term? I can show you any number of them that are more mature and they're not ornamental anymore. And people don't take them down, they keep them, but is it really fine design? In an important location like that, don't know that I would have used a Bradford pear. I think we've covered everything back here. And again, while we're talking about the Bradford pear, the folks are barely home from being away all winter. What am I so interested in a plant blooming for in April? Why is that? That I'm using a plant that's an April bloomer when no one's out here? I think I would have been, I don't know that bloom is important to begin with. And if I were using a plant for real screening and shading for a very hot deck, I don't know that I'd be using a Bradford for shading. Is it more formal looking and maybe go with the style of the client? That could be a true statement. And maybe that's an overwhelming reason to use the plant because of its regularity. But when you decide what plant to use, it has to do with all the expectations of the client from the area. And if the formality of the plant was the overwhelming overriding criteria, I guess you have that until the plant comes apart. And if shade were the most relevant part of it, don't know that I would have used this. If season of bloom was the most relevant, don't know that I would have used this. Ability to buy a large plant, there you go. You have the ability to buy a large Bradford pear. Great reason to use the plant. So there are pros and cons with any decision. That's decisions I leave to clients when you give them good information. And they say, yes, I love a Bradford pear. I love the formality. I love that I can get a big size. There's reasons to put in a Bradford pear. And to the client, it may offset the negatives to the plant. Now, if we look, this is the east side of the property. The Atlantic Ocean is, let's just call it an eighth of a mile away, not far at all. And we come off the deck, nice and sunny and warm, beautiful deck. But that's where they're going to be seating with furniture and so forth. And we look over towards the water, and there's a cut of it. I think a large tree was there, and that's gone now. It didn't make it through the winter, and which is just as well. But the client said, well, what do we do here? What kind of a plant goes here? And it's kind of interesting because if we consider we've walked around this property already behind me, and off to my left you'll see a Japanese maple that they really enjoy, and say to yourself, well, what should be here? I would think another Japanese maple, but a lower one, a dissectum, something that's not going to go like that. It's going to be a nice umbrella shade plant, very nice from here. It won't shade the arborvitae, and he agreed with that. So I think we're going to be seeing a Japanese maple go on that spot. All right.
It's recording now.
Okay. So this is a next door property, and they're completely going to rehab this house. And I explained to the folks when I was first in the property, and I've been clear, I'm new to this property, some of the drainage issues, you can see them much higher. The whole lawn area was from the foundation. And they are going to build a wall to keep the grade away from that house. And the question was, well, if I'm going to build a wall in this area in order to keep water away from the house, the rhododendron that's a Cataviense, by the way. I don't know which one it is, the old lion-clad rhododendron, is a mess, and it's way too close to the house. Again, this plant moves easily. Dig out behind, a big area behind that rhododendron, and I'll walk over to the side of the plant, like a tree, way out here, 6 feet this way, dig around the rhododendron, and move it this way. And they have bobcats here and tools. Move the plant into the hole, and they'll be able to build a wall. That's it. Okay, so this is the front left of that property, again, towards the ocean, about an eighth of a mile away, maybe a little more than that. And there's a screening issue here. Now, they built this nice wall. It's my client's wall. That's a nice wall. That works. It's a dry wall. You can see that. You can see through it in one space, perhaps. I know I can. And it's dry laid. Not too regular for dry laid. I'm kind of interested in how well it holds up. But anyway, this needs to be screened. And I came up with a plant, given the criteria here. The expectation was screening pretty quickly. We don't want to take a lot of land away. So we want to give away 5-6 feet of area here. But we don't want a hemlock that's going to be 30 foot wide. We don't want a plant that's going to attain real width to it. And we want to be kind of interesting if we can be. We've got enough specimen stuff going on in the property, so I guess we can give it another whack. We have Carpinus over there, the hornbeams, on that person's property. And the client did mention he liked those. He saw it and he thought those were nice plants. And they have the ability to be 20 feet wide and quite a bit larger. And I'm kind of surprised it's still that narrow. Probably planted too deeply. But anyway, there's a variety of the Carpinus Franz Fontaine. And that plant, the books say, grows about this wide, something like that. I've seen it in many books, and that's wrong, of course. And it's going to be more like this wide. And it's perhaps in this location can get wider, but I haven't seen it wider. It's a relatively new plant to me, maybe 10 years that I've known about it. And it will easily get to 10, 12 feet. and then it's going to be maintained at about that height. That's the negative side of this. It has to be maintained by hand pruning the top and the width and keep it like an allay kind of a thing, a nice regular hedgerow, which would work well with the property and give them a nice screen. Again, that screen is not a year-round screen. It just breaks up the vista in the wintertime that, as I've already said, they're not here in the wintertime. Not relevant to this client, and he wants it for him, not for selling the property. He's not doing this work in order to turn the place over. There's an irrigation head in the way here. It's a newer style Rainbird. It's a nice head, one of the 5,000. That is have to come out of there, so it's nice to see we've got issues with irrigation in the ground. We've got to realign heads anyway. And that planting, the center of the plant probably would be about 2.5 foot, maybe 3 foot off the wall. And I think about 10 plants would do it. Let me walk that out, seeing as we're doing it. We've got a gate here which is going to stay, which is not used. So we'll put the first plant right here-ish. Again, it's not used. If that was one plant, that's too close for the second maybe. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, about 6 plants. Something like that. And we'll do that again to see if it's about right. Perhaps 7. But it's not a whole, it's not 8, not 10. I'm wrong about that. And then we'll come out the front, and probably, he asked about this location. Well, he's got a magnolia on the other side of the property. Let's put a magnolia, the same one over here. That would look nice, but we can't come in with another specimen tree. He's got a beech behind me, behind the camera. That's going to be quite a large plant. That's a specimen plant. Don't need another specimen really here. So if we've got a beech on the other side of the property on the west side, let's put another one over here. And he likes it, likes the beech, the magnolias anyway. It's something that he recognizes and likes. So that's the first go around on the property. Now already I've got a person digging out back. And let's look at the root system on one of those Leland cypress, and let's see what we find. Back up a little bit. I'm going to be heading this way. So we've already dug around one of the plants, trying to learn how deep they're planted, see if there's an issue there. So let's walk through this. I'm going to come through, and you're going to come through with me in order to see this, but I wanted to put it in context. Here is what we found. We found a root system that is, ground level was up here, 4 inches down or so. We have a whole root system developing around the whole plant. That is not the original root system of the plant. The original root system is down deeper, way deep. And you see these plants, roots growing up top, trying to find the right mixture of air, fertilizer, soil, whatever. They just can't stay deep, so the plant's coming up with a root system that wants to be shallow rooted, which is what this plant wants to do. So the whole deeper root system, now I'm going to stand up and try to wiggle this plant, and you can see how tentative everything is. I don't know that we can straighten these plants and take them out and redo them, because all this new root system will be out of the ground. A little bit of an issue there. But I'm just going to wiggle this a bit, and you can see how loose it is. That's what we're looking at. So the correction, it may not be simple. We're doing a lot more digging to understand the whole planting of Leland cypress and see if, get a better idea of what the correction is, okay? Take another fast look at this fence. We just come by the juniper planting on the west side of the property by the street. The red cedar planting. Here's the fence. This is climbing hydrangea, which is extremely aggressive. Going to be this far from the fence if somebody doesn't maintain it. It's going to be everywhere. And down to a lot of fence showing. I don't know that I want an ornamental fence showing there. I don't know that I would think that's good design. Coming off the terrace, looking at all those fence caps, given what's going on the rest of the property. So that's why I said there's a real design issue to me going on if I'd be thinking about trying to soften that, if I would have done it that way. But, importantly, the client really isn't that concerned with it. That's important. If they like it, they like it. It's not their main thing to bury the fence. Nor would it be necessarily mine, but it's awfully strong in the eye. And again, wintertime we don't care. During the summer, would I have something with more foliage on it that wants to be 7-foot plant or something, so the fence shines through it? Doesn't take it out, just the fence is clearly there, but it's softened by a shrub of some kind. That's what I probably would have tried to plant. But the client isn't that upset by any of that. Okay? Let's take a look at these trees here. That hedgerow, that's Franz Fontaine. That's the hedgerow I'm talking about that hasn't been maintained. I put those in probably 6 years ago or so. And they're probably 20 feet tall almost, and about 7 foot, 8 foot wide. Easy to keep that plant a narrow plant. Easy. So this Franz Fontaine, Pinus speculus Franz Fontaine. Heading back to the ranch, thought of stopping and showing you some trees that I know about. What is this? Leland cypress. They were looking at a planting that's put in, multi-stemmed, and you can see what it did. The Leland comes apart. It's multi-stemmed. And if you keep going along, we'll look at the American holly. A lot tougher plant. If we go a little further, these Lelands are bent over, but they're single-stemmed. And that's the advantage of single-stemmed over the multis. We're going to be going back to the property in the end in a second. I'll show you a couple of more things.